Cruelty has a funny way of backfiring. When two bitter waitresses pushed their overweight co-worker toward the most dangerous man in Chicago, they expected tears and public humiliation. Instead, they accidentally handed a ruthless, deaf mafia boss the only woman he would ever burn the city down to protect. Harper Quinn knew the rules of the high-end hospitality industry. At the Obsidian Room, an exclusive, ridiculously pretentious steakhouse in downtown Chicago, the waitstaff were expected to look like runway models. Harper did not look like a runway model. She was a size 22, undeniably fat, with soft, generous curves, thick thighs, and a round, beautiful face framed by chaotic curls. She was hired only because she had an encyclopedic knowledge of vintage wines and a phenomenal memory for VYP orders. But her competence didn't protect her from the venom of her co-workers. Jessica Davies and Brittany Stone were the undisputed queens of the restaurant floor. Tall, blonde, and possessing the kind of ruthless vanity that thrived on putting others down, they made Harper's life a living hell. They constantly bumped into her in the narrow kitchen corridors, loudly discussed their extreme diets within earshot, and regularly stole her most lucrative tables. Harper kept her head down, swallowed the lump in her throat, and focused on the paychecks she desperately needed to keep her sick mother in a decent care facility. Then came a freezing Tuesday evening in November. The restaurant was completely booked, buzzing with the quiet hum of old money and dangerous power. The general manager, a nervous, sweaty man named Mr. Carmichael, gathered the staff for a frantic pre-shift meeting. "Listen to me carefully," Carmichael hissed, his eyes darting around. "Table 4 is reserved for Julian Russo. I do not care if you have to walk on water tonight. Everything for that table must be flawless." A collective shiver went through the staff. Everyone in Chicago knew who Julian Russo was. He was the head of the Russo Syndicate, a ghost in the criminal underworld who controlled the city's ports and most of its high-stakes underground gambling. But beyond his terrifying reputation for violence, Julian had a unique characteristic that made serving him incredibly nerve-wracking. He was completely deaf. He had lost his hearing in a car bombing a decade ago that took the life of his father. Now, he navigated his cutthroat world through fluent American Sign Language, an expert ability to read lips, and the towering, terrifying presence of his right-hand man and interpreter, Matteo Bianchi. Julian was notoriously intolerant of disrespect, hated being crowded, and despised it when people tried to sneak up on him or touch him to get his attention. Jessica and Brittany exchanged a look. A cruel, sparkling glint appeared in Jessica's eyes. Throughout the night, Harper was swamped, practically running between the kitchen and the dining floor. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her forehead was damp with sweat. She felt acutely aware of her size every time she had to squeeze past the narrow spaces between tables, apologizing softly. Around 9 p.m., Julian Russo arrived. He was a striking, imposing man in a charcoal bespoke suit with sharp cheekbones, dark, intense eyes, and an aura of absolute command. He moved with a predatory grace, flanked by the massive, scowling Matteo. They took their seats at table 4, a secluded booth in the back corner. The air in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harper was busy polishing glasses behind the bar when Jessica approached her, wearing a sickly, sweet smile. "Hey, Harper," Jessica purred, leaning against the mahogany counter. "Carmichael wants you to take table 4. Harper froze, a glass slipping slightly in her damp hands. "Table 4? The Russo table? No, Carmichael explicitly said only senior staff." "Well, plans changed," Brittany chimed in, appearing right behind Jessica. Turns out Mr. Russo specifically requested you. We brought out his appetizers, and he pointed right at you. Carmichael says it's your table now." "Me?" Harper asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why would he point at me?" "Because you're exactly his type, obviously," Jessica lied smoothly, her tone dripping with mock encouragement. "Word on the street is that he loves big, curvy girls. But listen, Harper, Carmichael told us to give you the rundown. Mr. Russo is eccentric. He loves it when you give him extremely personal service." Harper frowned, her anxiety spiking. "What does that mean?" "It means," Brittany said, leaning in, "you need to get close, really close. He has a soft voice, so you have to lean right over his shoulder and speak directly into his ear. He hates it when people stand far away and shout. And whatever you do, place your hand on his shoulder when you talk to him. It shows him you're attentive. If you do that, he leaves a massive tip, like thousands of dollars." Harper hesitated. The promise of a massive tip was intoxicating. It could pay for 2 whole months of her mother's specialized physical therapy. But something felt wrong. "Are you sure? A hand on the shoulder? That seems so unprofessional for a place like this." "He's mafia, Harper. He doesn't care about our corporate handbook," Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Look, do you want the money or not? We're trying to do you a favor because we know you're struggling. If you blow this, Carmichael will fire you. Just go over there, walk up behind his right shoulder, lean in, touch him, and introduce yourself." They were setting her up. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew Julian was deaf, that he couldn't hear someone sneaking up behind him, that his right side was his absolute blind spot due to the booth's layout, and that touching him unannounced was a fast track to getting a gun pulled on you. They wanted to watch the fat girl get publicly humiliated, violently thrown out, and fired in disgrace. Ignorant of the true danger, Harper took a deep breath, smoothed down her apron over her wide hips, picked up a fresh bottle of vintage Barolo, and made her way toward table 4. The dining room felt like it was miles long. Every step Harper took felt heavier than the last. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her back. From the corner of her vision, she saw Jessica and Brittany huddling by the waiter's station, hands over their mouths to stifle their giggles. As she approached the booth, she saw Matteo standing a few feet away, currently distracted by an earpiece, his back half turned to the table. Julian was sitting in the booth, looking down at his phone, a glass of water resting near his left hand. The low lighting caught the silver edge of a hearing aid tucked discreetly behind his ear. But in her nervous state, Harper didn't register what it was. She remembered Jessica's instructions. Walk up behind his right shoulder. Lean in. Touch him. Speak directly into his ear. Harper stepped into his blind spot. She leaned her soft, heavy frame forward, her scent a warm, inviting mix of vanilla and cinnamon, drifting over the table. Taking a shaking breath, she gently placed her hand on his broad right shoulder and lowered her face right next to his ear. "Good evening, Mr. Russo. I'm Harper, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said softly. The reaction was explosive. Julian didn't just flinch. His survival instincts took over. Feeling a sudden, unannounced touch on his blind side, he moved with terrifying speed. In a fraction of a second, he spun around, his hand shooting up to grip Harper's wrist with a bruising force. Harper gasped, dropping the wine towel she was holding. Matteo, reacting to his boss's sudden movement, whipped around, his hand diving inside his suit jacket to grip the handle of his weapon. The few patrons sitting nearby gasped. The entire restaurant seemed to grind to a terrifying halt. Harper was paralyzed. Her wrist burned under Julian's iron grip. She stared down into his dark, furious eyes. He was breathing heavily, his body coiled for violence. But as he looked at her, really looked at her, his grip slightly loosened. He saw her wide, terrified brown eyes, the tremble of her full lips, and the sheer panic radiating from her soft features. He didn't speak. He just stared at her lips. I'm so sorry, Harper stammered, her voice shaking violently. I was just doing what they told me. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm sorry. Julian's eyes tracked the movement of her lips perfectly. He released her wrist, though his intense gaze didn't waver. He looked at her hand, still trembling in the air, and then looked past her shoulder. Following his gaze, Harper turned her head. Across the room, Jessica and Brittany were no longer giggling. They looked pale and horrified, realizing that instead of getting Harper yelled at, they might have just triggered a mafia shootout in the middle of a Michelin-star dining room. Julian looked back at Harper. He raised his hands and moved his fingers in swift, fluid motions. Harper stood there, bewildered, a tear slipping down her plump cheek. I don't understand. Matteo stepped forward, his hand slipping away from his weapon. He cleared his throat, his deep voice carrying easily over the deathly silent dining room. The boss asks why you approached him from his blind side and touched him. It is widely known that he is deaf and does not tolerate sudden physical contact. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath Harper's feet. Deaf, the cruelty of what had just happened crashed over her like a tidal wave. The instructions, the eccentricities, the demand to whisper in his ear. They hadn't just set her up to look foolish. They had set her up to fail in the most humiliating, potentially dangerous way possible. They used her desperation against her. A hot flush of deep shame and furious indignation colored Harper's face and neck. She didn't cry. Instead, she squared her shoulders. She looked directly into Julian Russo's eyes, making sure her face was fully illuminated so he could read her lips. I was told by my coworkers that you requested me, Harper said, her voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in her hands. They told me you liked it when servers leaned in close and touched your shoulder. I didn't know you were deaf, Mr. Russo. I am terribly, terribly sorry for crossing your boundaries. It will not happen again. She then did something that surprised even herself. Raising her hands, she dug deep into her memory to recall the basic signs she had learned from a college roommate years ago. Slowly, clumsily, she signed, I am sorry. They lied to me. Julian's eyes widened a fraction of an inch. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered across his sharp features. His dark eyes swept over her body, taking in her curves, the soft lines of her hips, the flush on her chest, and finally, the fierce, determined fire in her eyes. She wasn't cowering anymore. She was angry, but maintaining her dignity. Julian raised a single finger, gesturing for her to wait. He turned his head and locked eyes with Mr. Carmichael, who was practically hyperventilating near the hostess stand. Julian snapped his fingers twice. Carmichael scurried over, looking like he was about to faint. Mr. Russo, I apologize profoundly. This server will be fired immediately. I assure you. Julian slammed his hand on the table, cutting the manager off instantly. The sound cracked like a whip. Julian signed rapidly to Matteo. The boss says, Matteo translated, a grim smile playing on his lips, that if you fire Harper, he will buy this building tomorrow and burn it to the ground with you inside it. Carmichael went sheet white. Furthermore, Matteo continued, the boss will only be served by Harper for the rest of the evening, and every time he dines here in the future, She is his exclusive server. As for the two blondes hiding by the waiter's station, Matteo pointed directly at Jessica and Brittany. The boss wants them to clean the grease traps in the kitchen for the rest of the night. If he sees their faces on the floor again tonight, there will be consequences. Carmichael nodded frantically. Yes, absolutely. At once, Mr. Russo. Julian looked back up at Harper. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently tapping the table in front of her. He offered her a devastatingly handsome, rare smile, and then tapped the menu. He was ready to order. Over the next 2 months, the Obsidian Room experienced a dramatic shift in its ecosystem. Julian Russo went from coming in once every few months to dining there 3 times a week. And true to his word, he allowed absolutely no one but Harper to serve him. The dynamic between them shifted from a terrifying encounter to a quiet, profound connection. Harper began spending her meager free time watching online tutorials, frantically teaching herself American Sign Language. She wanted to speak to him directly, without relying on Matteo's booming translations. The first time she approached his table and seamlessly signed, "Good evening, Julian. The sea bass is excellent tonight," he had stopped dead. A slow, genuine smile had spread across his face, transforming him from a terrifying mob boss into a breathtakingly handsome man. He had reached out, gently wrapping his fingers around her thick wrist, not in anger like the first night, but with a reverent, grounding tenderness. He had signed back, "You are beautiful when you concentrate." Harper had blushed so hard, she thought she might spontaneously combust. For her entire life, her weight had been a target. Men had either ignored her, fetishized her in secret, or insulted her to her face, but Julian looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. He watched the sway of her wide hips when she walked away. He stared at the soft swell of her cleavage when she leaned over to pour his wine. There was no shame in his gaze, only a burning, possessive appreciation. Meanwhile, Jessica and Brittany were drowning in their own bile. The grease trap punishment had been humiliating, but watching the fat, ugly waitress get treated like royalty by a billionaire mafia boss was driving them insane. They had lost their VIP standing. Carmichael, terrified of Julian's wrath, had essentially made Harper untouchable. She was given the best shifts and was bringing home tips so large she was finally able to pay off her mother's medical debts. The jealousy festered into something dark and dangerous. Jessica couldn't let it go. She hated Harper with a visceral passion, completely unable to accept that a woman of Harper's size was winning. "It's a joke," Jessica hissed to Brittany one night in the locker room. "He's just playing with her. A guy like that doesn't want a whale. He's doing it to spite us." "We need to get her fired," Brittany whispered back, applying a thick coat of lip gloss. "Carmichael won't do it unless his hands are tied. We need proof that she's stealing. If she's a thief, even her precious mafia sugar daddy won't protect her. Guys like him hate thieves." Jessica smirked. "I know exactly what to do." What Jessica didn't know was that Julian Russo didn't just casually like Harper. He was utterly obsessed with her. He had already assigned 2 of his undercover men to sit at the bar every night she worked, ensuring no one disrespected her. He knew about the whispers. He knew about the dirty looks. He was simply waiting for the bullies to make a fatal mistake. On a busy Friday night, a wealthy patron, a hedge fund manager known for his arrogance, complained loudly that his $40,000 Rolex had vanished from his table when he went to the restroom. The restaurant went into lockdown. Carmichael was frantic. "Nobody leaves," Carmichael shouted. "We are searching everyone's lockers, now!" Harper stood by the kitchen doors, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. She hadn't stolen anything. But she knew how the world worked. When something went wrong, people always looked for a scapegoat. Jessica pushed her way to the front of the crowd, looking deeply concerned. "Mr. Carmichael, I don't want to point fingers, but I saw Harper acting really suspicious near table 6 earlier." Harper gasped. "That is a lie! I wasn't even serving table 6. "Let's just check the lockers," Brittany added smoothly. "If she has nothing to hide, it won't be a problem." Carmichael led the way to the staff room, followed by the hedge fund manager, a few security guards, and the entire wait staff. Harper's hands were shaking as she unlocked her metal locker. She pulled the door open. Sitting right on top of her worn, oversized cardigan was the gleaming, diamond-encrusted Rolex. The room erupted into gasps. "I knew it!" Jessica shrieked. "She's a thief! She's been playing the victim this whole time!" "I didn't put that there," Harper cried, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "I swear to God I didn't. Somebody planted it." "Save it for the police," the hedge fund manager snarled, stepping forward to grab Harper's arm. "You disgusting fat thief! I'm pressing charges." Before his hand could even make contact with Harper's skin, a massive, suited arm shot out from the doorway, grabbing the man by the throat. It was Matteo. He lifted the wealthy hedge fund manager an inch off the ground and slammed him against the lockers. The room went dead silent. Standing in the doorway, exuding a murderous aura, was Julian Russo. He wasn't supposed to be at the restaurant tonight, but his men at the bar had alerted him the moment the lockdown started. Julian's eyes swept the room. He looked at the watch. He looked at Jessica's poorly concealed smirk. And then he looked at Harper. She was sobbing, her large frame shaking with terror and humiliation. Julian didn't need to read lips to know what had happened. He walked slowly toward Harper. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He reached out, taking a delicate silk handkerchief from his breast pocket, and gently wiped the tears from Harper's cheeks. His touch was feather-light, a stark contrast to the violence radiating from him. He turned to look at Jessica and Brittany. His eyes were entirely devoid of humanity. It was the look of a predator staring at dead meat. He signed rapidly to Matteo. Matteo, still holding the choking hedge fund manager against the wall with one hand, smiled a chilling, terrible smile. "The boss has a message," Matteo rumbled, his voice echoing in the cramped room. "He says he knows exactly who put the watch in the locker, because his men hacked the restaurant's security cameras 2 months ago." Jessica's face drained of all color. She stumbled backward, bumping into a row of lockers. "The boss says," Matteo continued, dropping the hedge fund manager, who collapsed coughing onto the floor, "that touching what belongs to him is an unforgivable offense, and Harper belongs to him." Julian stepped forward, crowding into Jessica's personal space. He leaned down, placing his hands on the locker on either side of her head, trapping her. He didn't say a word. He just stared into her terrified, tear-filled eyes, letting her feel the absolute, suffocating terror of his presence. He let her realize that she hadn't just bullied a waitress. She had declared war on the Chicago Mafia. Julian stood back up, took Harper's hand, and intertwined their fingers. He led her out of the locker room, out of the restaurant, and into the cold Chicago night, leaving a room full of terrified people waiting for the wrath of the Russo syndicate to fall upon them. The real story of Harper and Julian, however, was just beginning. The biting, unforgiving wind of the Chicago winter whipped mercilessly through the downtown streets, but Harper felt none of it. Before she could even process the magnitude of what had just occurred in that cramped locker room, Julian had draped his heavy, custom-tailored Tom Ford cashmere overcoat around her shaking shoulders. The garment completely engulfed her large, soft frame, wrapping her in an intoxicating, masculine scent of expensive cedarwood, bergamot, and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder. He ushered her out the back exit and into the rear of a massive black, bulletproof Maybach parked discreetly in the alley behind the obsidian room. Matteo stayed behind for a few crucial moments, a silent, terrifying sentinel left to deal with the immediate ashes of Jessica and Brittany's ruined careers before slipping into the driver's seat. The drive was steeped in a thick, heavy silence. Harper's heart hammered a frantic, exhausting rhythm against her ribs, her breath fogging the tinted, reinforced glass. She was just a waitress, a fat, struggling, perpetually exhausted waitress from the South Side who spent her Friday nights clipping grocery coupons and crying over spreadsheet budgets just to afford her mother's staggering medical bills. Now, she was sitting in the back of a luxury rolling fortress with the most lethal man in Illinois. She stared down at her hands, still trembling in her lap. Then a large, warm hand covered hers. Julian. He wasn't looking out the window. He was looking only at her. His thumb began tracing soothing, rhythmic circles against the thick, soft flesh of her palm, grounding her racing mind. When the Maybach glided to a halt at the Waldorf Astoria, Chicago, where Julian occupied the entire top-floor penthouse, Harper's anxiety spiked again. The sheer, unapologetic opulence of the building, the dark marble floors, the gold-leaf accents, the private elevator that required a retinal scan, made her feel painfully out of place. As the elevator doors chimed open to reveal a sprawling, minimalist penthouse with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the glittering, icy skyline of Lake Michigan, Harper hugged her arms tightly around her wide waist. She felt hyper-aware of her flour-dusted uniform, her scuffed non-slip work shoes, and the chaotic tangle of her curls. Julian didn't let her spiral into her insecurities. He guided her to a plush, low-profile velvet sofa, walked over to a crystal decanter, and poured her a generous measure of Macallan 25. He pressed the heavy glass into her trembling hands, then crouched down directly in front of her. He gently tilted her chin up, his dark eyes demanding her full attention so she could read his lips. Raising his hands, he signed slowly, his expression burning with an absolute, terrifying sincerity. "You are safe. You will never walk into that restaurant as a servant again." "Never." "Julian," Harper whispered, her voice cracking as a fresh wave of tears threatened to spill. "I need my job. You don't understand. My mother, she has severe multiple sclerosis. She's at the Oak Brook Premier Healthcare Center. It's an expensive facility, but it's the only place equipped to handle her decline. If I miss a single payment, they'll transfer her to a state ward. I can't let her suffer like that." Julian's sharp, hardened features softened into something incredibly rare. Pure, unadulterated tenderness. He took the glass of scotch from her hands, setting it on the table. Then he reached out, his large hands settling firmly on her froiled plush hips. He pulled her forward slightly until she was pressed flush against his solid, muscular chest. He didn't just accept her size. He actively worshipped it. The way his broad hands gripped her generous curves, treating her body like something priceless and sacred, made Harper feel a dizzying, intoxicating surge of power she had never experienced. "I will handle Oak Brook," he signed, his lips brushing her forehead between his precise gestures. "I will handle the bills, the doctors, the facility. I will handle everything. You are mine now, Harper. Your burdens are my burdens. You never have to worry about money again." While Harper was finally experiencing the profound security and affection she had been denied her entire life, a very different kind of desperation was unfolding across the city. Jessica was unraveling at an alarming speed, fired on the spot, publicly humiliated in front of the city's elite, and permanently blacklisted from every high-end hospitality group in Chicago. Her meticulously crafted, vain life had been incinerated in a matter of hours. Brittany had already blocked her number, packed a bag, and fled to her parents' house in the suburbs, terrified of Matteo's parting threat. But Jessica's vanity had mutated into a toxic, blinding rage. She wasn't going to let a fat, pathetic loser ruin her, sitting in a grimy, sticky booth at the Rusty Anchor, a notorious dive bar on the edge of the city's derelict industrial district. Jessica nursed a cheap, watered-down vodka. Her designer makeup was smudged, but her eyes were manic as she typed furiously on her phone. She had casually dated a low-level enforcer a few years ago and knew exactly who hated the Russo syndicate the most. Leo the Viper Romano. Leo was a vicious, old-school mobster who controlled the southern docks and had been bleeding territory to Julian's superior tactics for years. Jessica managed to get a message to one of Leo's lieutenants. Within an hour, the tavern door swung open, letting in a blast of freezing air. A man with a deeply scarred face, dead eyes, and a cheap leather jacket slid into the booth across from her. "You said you had leverage on Russo," the man grunted, his eyes scanning her with obvious distaste, smelling the desperation rolling off her. "I do," Jessica sneered, leaning over the sticky table, her voice a venomous hiss. "Russo has a new weakness, a fat, ugly waitress named Harper Quinn. He's obsessed with her, completely out of his mind for her. He just blew up his favorite restaurant just to protect her. She has a mother, Margaret Quinn, living at the Oak Brook Premier Healthcare Facility, room 412. If you take the crippled mother, you control the girl. If you control the girl, Russo will hand over whatever territory you want." The lieutenant paused, digesting the intel. A slow, sickening smirk spread across his scarred face. He reached into his jacket and tossed a thick, rubber-banded envelope of cash onto the table. "You're a nasty piece of work, Blondie, but the boss will appreciate the tip. Consider Russo's leash officially pulled." Jessica grabbed the cash, her fingers trembling with a triumphant, sick thrill. Let's see how much the deaf freak loved his precious, oversized waitress when a rival cartel held a gun to her mother's head. Back at the penthouse, the digital clock on the nightstand glowed a muted red. 2:15 a.m. Harper had finally collapsed into a deep, exhausted sleep in Julian's massive, king-sized bed. She was wearing one of his expensive silk dress shirts, the dark fabric stretching comfortably over her large breasts and thick, soft thighs, leaving the top few buttons undone. Julian hadn't slept. He was sitting in a dark, leather armchair in the corner of the room, a glass of water in hand, simply watching her breathe. For a man who lived his entire life in a world of silence and extreme violence, the sight of this soft, beautiful woman in his bed brought him an unprecedented sense of peace. Suddenly, the heavy smartwatch strapped to his wrist vibrated violently. 3 short pulses, followed by one long one. It was the highest-level emergency override signal from Matteo. Julian tapped the glowing screen. A text from Matteo appeared in bold red letters. "Oak Brook breached. Romano's men. 4 heavily armed shooters in the lobby. They are asking the front desk for room 412. Julian's blood turned instantly to liquid nitrogen. The rare, peaceful look vanished from his face, immediately replaced by the terrifying, cold-blooded killer that had conquered the Chicago underworld. He didn't make a sound. He didn't wake Harper. He quietly stood up, walked to his walk-in closet, and strapped a customized matte black Glock 19 to his shoulder holster. He grabbed 2 extra magazines, pulled on his jacket, and took one last lingering look at the sleeping woman who had unknowingly become his entire world. Nobody touched what belonged to Julian Russo. And tonight, Leo Romano's men were going to learn that lesson in blood. The Oak Brook Premier Healthcare Center was usually a sanctuary of quiet medical efficiency, but at 2:45 a.m., it was a battleground, waiting to happen. Leo Romano's men had disabled the front desk security cameras and were creeping down the 4th-floor corridor, their silenced weapons drawn. They expected an easy grab-and-go. They severely underestimated the paranoia of a Deaf Mafia Boss. Julian had secretly dispatched 3 of his elite guards to the facility the moment Harper mentioned her mother earlier that night. When Julian and Matteo arrived via the fire escape, the ambush was already perfectly set. Julian operated in a world of absolute silence, which gave him a lethal advantage in the chaos of a firefight. He didn't get distracted by the deafening crack of gunfire or the screams of his enemies. He operated purely on visual precision and tactical genius. As Romano's men kicked open the door to what they thought was room 412, they were met with a blinding flashbang grenade thrown by Matteo. In the ensuing chaos, Julian moved like a ghost. He communicated with Matteo using rapid one-handed tactical ASL signs. Flank left. 2 targets. Julian stepped into the hallway, raising his weapon with 0 hesitation. 2 hollow-point rounds dropped the first 2 thugs before they could even blink the blindness from their eyes. The 3rd man panicked, firing wildly into the walls. Julian easily sidestepped the erratic fire, closed the distance, and disarmed the man with a brutal strike to the throat, letting Matteo secure him for interrogation. The 4th man, the lieutenant who had met with Jessica, tried to run for the stairwell. Julian calmly aimed and shot him in the kneecap. The man collapsed, screaming in agony. Julian walked over to him, his face devoid of any mercy. He looked down at the bleeding man and signed to Matteo. "The boss wants to know who gave you the location," Matteo demanded, pressing his boot onto the man's bleeding knee. "A blonde!" the man shrieked, sobbing. "A waitress! Jessica Davies! She sold the girl out for 10 grand. Julian's eyes darkened to pitch black. He gave Matteo a single, sharp nod. The message was clear. Clean up the mess, move Harper's mother to the Russo private estate in the Hamptons immediately, and handle Jessica Davies. The next morning, Jessica woke up in her luxury Gold Coast apartment, counting the cash she had received from the Romano cartel. She was already planning her comeback, dreaming of moving to Los Angeles. The resounding crash of her front door being battered off its hinges shattered her delusions. "FBI, get on the ground! Show me your hands!" A dozen federal agents flooded into her living room, assault rifles aimed directly at her chest. Jessica screamed, dropping her coffee mug as she fell to her knees in terror. Matteo hadn't just sent thugs to beat her up. Julian Russo was much smarter than that. He had his hackers transfer $50,000 of Romano's marked, blood-stained drug money into Jessica's offshore bank accounts, along with digital evidence linking her to a conspiracy to commit kidnapping across state lines. She wasn't just going to get a slap on the wrist. She was facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary without parole. As they slapped the heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists and dragged her out of her apartment building in her pajamas, surrounded by flashing police lights and the glaring eyes of her wealthy neighbors, Jessica realized the horrifying truth. She had tried to humiliate a fat girl, and in return, she had destroyed her own life permanently. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere at the Obsidian Room was unrecognizable. Mr. Carmichael had mysteriously retired early, handing over the keys to the new anonymous owner of the building. Harper stood in the center of the grand dining room. She wasn't wearing a flower-dusted apron anymore. She was wearing a breathtaking, custom-made, ruby-red wrap dress that hugged her thick thighs, cinched her waist, and proudly displayed her magnificent curves. Her hair was styled in elegant, cascading waves, and a delicate diamond necklace rested against her collarbone. The heavy mahogany doors opened, and Julian walked in. He was flanked by Matteo, but as soon as his eyes locked onto Harper, the rest of the world ceased to exist. He walked up to her, his gaze sweeping over her full, beautiful figure with unapologetic reverence. He didn't care about societal standards or the shallow vanity of the world. To him, she was a goddess. The woman who had looked past his disability, who had treated him with dignity, and who possessed a heart pure enough to risk everything for her sick mother. Julian pulled a heavy, embossed leather folder from his jacket and placed it in her hands. Harper opened it, her eyes widening as she read the legal jargon. It was the deed to the restaurant. It was entirely in her name. "Julian, I can't take this," Harper gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "This is worth millions." Julian gently placed his hands over hers. He stepped close, the heat of his body warming her. Slowly, purposefully, he signed to her, ensuring she caught every single word. "You are not a waitress anymore, Harper. You are a queen, and a queen needs her own castle." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box, snapping it open to reveal a massive, flawless, emerald-cut diamond ring. "Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life worshipping every single inch of you." Harper let out a wet, joyful laugh, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She didn't hesitate. She threw her soft, heavy arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Julian caught her, his strong arms wrapping around her wide waist, lifting her effortlessly off the floor as she kissed him deeply, a silent promise sealing their unimaginable fate. The cruel bullies had dug their own graves, leaving the curvy, big-hearted girl to claim the ultimate prize, the keys to the city, and the fiercely loyal heart of the most dangerous man in Chicago. What a wild, satisfying ride. Karma truly came back to bite those cruel co-workers, proving that kindness and inner beauty always win in the end. Julian and Harper's story shows that true love doesn't care about society's shallow standards. It's about respect, loyalty, and protecting the ones you cherish. If you loved watching the underdog claim her crown and the bullies get exactly what they deserved, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more unbelievable true drama stories.